Hi, I'm Glenn Gilmore, and for 8 years I had the privilege of serving as mayor of a community of about 90,000 people. During that time, I also served on the board of directors of a university hospital. So I understand how fundamental health and human services are to the welfare of a community, particularly when it comes to children and to our seniors. And so I'm absolutely excited to have with us today two thought leaders from Microsoft who recently helped lead a panel discussion at the American Public Human Services Association conference on the subject of generative AI in health and human services. So I've got to imagine, gentlemen, that your panel was probably the most well attended at this conference. And I ask that you both begin by introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do at Microsoft. Julian, if you'd care to start.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Glenn, and thank you for having me. My name is Julian So, and I've been with Microsoft for 16 years now, primarily in the cloud group. Started with Office 365 and over to Azure, and now I'm actually working on Azure OpenAI, and I have been covering the AI technologies for the last 5 to 6 years now. And while I'm not an industry expert from a health and human services standpoint, I do work with them very closely in other verticals in bringing generative AI and other AI technologies to that vertical itself as well.
Welcome, Julian. Andy?
Thank you, Glenn, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I'm Andy Pittman. I've been with Microsoft about 18 years, and before that, I spent about 18 years in the consulting world, servicing primarily government customers. Here at Microsoft, my responsibility is primarily focused on the health and human services industry, where I help lead our strategy across programs like Medicaid, child welfare, SNAP and TANF, child support enforcement, and other areas.
So I can already see by your introductions, gentlemen, that you've got this great depth of experience in terms of having that health and human services, as well as that strong technological, which is really what we need to make that new technology be something that communities across the country and globe can leverage. Julian, I'm wondering if you could help us understand what it is we're talking about when we talk about generative AI and how that differs from traditional artificial intelligence.
Oh, definitely, Glenn. I think when we talk about artificial intelligence before generative AI, it's all about the data scientist world. We're talking about a lot of data, and we're talking about structured data, meaning things from databases. We're talking about special coding that needs to be done by humans to be able to use AI models. And these models need to be trained and retrained in order for it to really get tuned to the work that you're going to put the models to, so that the accuracy and obviously the biasness and all those things are taken care of. Now, generative AI is actually very interesting. It's very revolutionary because for the first time, you are now able to communicate with technology using natural language, which is the best interface to communicate technology, right?
And
So
we're talking, excuse me, but we're actually talking, when you say natural language, you're talking about conversational interaction
exactly,
between the person and that data and that information and that artificial.
right.
Okay.
Just like the way we are conversing right now, Glenn, you don't actually have to ask the question with specific keywords so that the model will understand. So if you ask for example, groceries or bread, the generative AI, knowing the knowledge that it possesses, knows that bread, for example, is part of the collection called groceries. So you don't actually have to use very, very specific terms. So I think what's most transformative, Glenn, is that subject matter experts, like for example, in this case, health and human services experts, they may not be technologists. So they don't actually have to gain that skill to be able to interact with the technology. For the first time, generative AI allows the deep involvement of subject matter experts, the people who actually matter and actually deal with the subject and the customers and the citizens. They are the ones involved in designing the solution, which makes most solutions in that scenario, if you think about it, very effective, and it's going to be it's going to be a good experience for the people receiving those services.
So we're really talking about an incredible shift in technology that is going to open the doors to innovation and new efficiencies. And it's kind of exciting to hear that health and human services professionals are already leveraging that. Andy, I wonder if you could help us understand how some of Microsoft's partners are already seizing that opportunity of leveraging generative AI.
So
Yeah,
go ahead,
definitely.
Andy.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Julian. I'm happy to do that. So first, you have to think about some of the fundamental problems that these health and human services agencies are facing. They are challenged always by available staff. They have trouble getting enough caseworkers. There's lack of continuity of caseworkers across the duration of a case, the training problem. All these things and many others create day-to-day issues that present an opportunity for generative AI to make a difference. So to answer your question specifically, we are fortunate to work with a bunch of different partners in this space who are experts in areas like child welfare, for example, Redmayne, or who are expert in areas like SNAP programs and child support enforcement, like Young Williams. And so a few months back, Julian and I and our colleagues reached out to them and said, how can we help you figure out ways to make generative AI make these processes more efficient and begin solving some of these problems? And you'll learn more about that directly from, pardon me, our partners. But just to give you a flavor of that now, think about this. If you can provide a capability that lets the end recipient of a program like, say, SNAP, to ask questions about eligibility for the program, or maybe in the case of child welfare, for the caseworker to be able to say, tell me about the history of this particular case so I know where I might focus my attention in my scarce amount of time. So that's where Young Williams and Redmayne came into play. And their deep, deep expertise and decades of experience working in these business areas has resulted in AI solutions that are truly revolutionary. And that's what we presented last week at the APHSA ISM conference.
So I was surprised, Andy, when I had heard how already the health and human services community is using generative AI. But you've helped me understand and underscore the fact that we're talking about public services that are strained because of the sheer volume. And we know in this particular field, we have questions that are being asked all the time by people who have an immediacy. And now suddenly you have a technology that can speak, as Julian pointed out, in that natural conversational relationship. And so you can now suddenly bring some incredible efficiencies to an area that's so fundamental to the welfare of communities. Can you cite, Andy, any sort of examples of how your partners are actually using this technology in the field?
Absolutely. So for example, with Young Williams, they are basically facilitating answering questions for certain states for some of these human services programs. Their idea, and where they're very close to going into production, is to use these capabilities to literally answer the corpus of thousands of questions that they've historically seen through these customers, and testing the AI capabilities that Julian's assisting them with to make sure that the AI capability can answer the questions in a meaningful way so that we don't have so much burden on these caseworkers. And conversely, with Redmayne, they're doing something similar, but as I intimated a moment ago, they're focusing less on the end citizen or end recipient of the program and more about the caseworkers and helping them become more efficient. I think in both cases, with Young Williams and Redmayne, you're going to see releases of product offerings in the very near future.
And what you've just described, Andy, is an enormous opportunity to help a public workforce that is overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of questions that they have, allowing them perhaps to focus on other work tasks that require even more intensive and professional background and care. I'm wondering, Julian, from your perspective of a technologist, the issues of, and you made mention of it, protecting against bias and also I think of as well just a sheer volume of information that's being shared. How do you protect against bias, which we know in healthcare has always been a concern when we talk about the use of artificial intelligence, and also providing for security of information?
Definitely, Glenn. And I think the technology itself, in terms of generative AI being a language model, I think that first and foremost reduces biasness as in traditional models, because the model is given data sources during generating of a response in real time. So first and foremost is grounded in factualness at the point that the response is being generated. However, even having said that, going into creating a language model itself in generative AI or Azure OpenAI in this case, some of the traditional precautions when developing AI models is still put in place. So, for example, using a lot of terms and words and how language is structured, that training data is very, very, very diverse. So using that diverse set of training data would provide the model exposure to a broad perspective and broad context, and that reduces biasness first and foremost. Secondarily, in developing the model, there are also de-biasing techniques that's being put in place. So for example, making sure that bias-inducing words and phrases are actually flagged and removed from the model itself. Things like, for example, adversarial testing. After the model is put in place, adversarial testing is a way for us to go in and hit the system with different types of questions and the way phrases are being put, so that potential biasness in the AI systems will also be reduced. So from a testing perspective, there's going to be the adversarial testing that is put in place as part of the development. We also provide transparency and accountability, and one of the ways of providing transparency is letting people know how the AI models are being trained in the first place, the approach. And we also encourage partners and customers to adopt the ethical responsibilities of AI. So they actually have to make sure they check the box. They know that, what are the requirements from a responsible AI perspective that Microsoft puts in place. And by default, this last one is very interesting. It actually includes the person or people, the human involved in part of the usage of Azure OpenAI from a technology perspective. And it happens in two ways. One, we always say that with generative AI, it acts as a co-pilot for the subject matter expert. It's not intended to remove the human from the equation itself as well. So as a co-pilot, any response that's being put out there is going to be verified while we create the user interface, so that the human is involved in verifying the information before it's being provided or released. Secondarily, go ahead, Glenn.
No, I was just going to say that I absolutely love your description of how the system is with Microsoft, that the human remains the co-pilot, because I think there's a misperception that with generative AI, it just goes on autopilot and
No.
raises, to me, concerns about governance. But you're giving an explanation of how governance is addressed. It's by stressing the point that the human is still the co-pilot, and that's a really important point that I think not enough people talk about, and I'm just delighted to hear you raise. So
Right.
thank you for that.
Yeah. And there's one piece that's really interesting too, Glenn, that I want to mention. And this last one is really the balancing act. So for example, to address biasness, we monitor the user system not based on the content, but based on whether it is performing in a way that, anything that's not caught from through the adversarial testing, for example, any biasness that's being caught would be addressed to improve the model in future. That monitoring is only for the service itself. But having said that, and by the way, that information, that monitoring is not shared, is truly for ensuring that the service is within the parameters that you and I are talking about right now. However, having said that, we provide the control of that monitoring. We put that back into the hands of the customer. So a customer can actually choose to say, hey, we take full responsibility. Please don't even monitor the use of the service. And we acknowledge all responsibility. We acknowledge all the responsible AI principles, and we're going to enforce that. So don't monitor a service for performance perspective. So it's a really interesting balance between making sure that the customer has control over how the service is being tracked, even from a performance standpoint. But at the same time, we also put in place that kind of monitoring just to ensure some of the concerns like biasness that you mentioned, Glenn.
And what you've done in sharing your perspective here, Julian, is to help us understand the depth of experience that Microsoft really has with the use of artificial intelligence. So when we hear about generative AI and everyone's wondering, well, how do we address all of these issues? Well, you think about partners who have been in this space for a very long time, and your readiness to share on the topic of transparency and governance really illustrates that point. Andy, I'm wondering, you've shared with us the relationship with Microsoft's partners, and can you help us understand a little bit more about that ecosystem of what your partners are bringing to bear in collaboration with Microsoft?
Certainly. So Young Williams and Redmayne are doing a stellar job of these human service scenario AI capabilities. But that's just a small part of the overall Microsoft partner community. We have many other partners focused on human services solutions, public safety solutions, critical infrastructure solutions. And so we are assisting not only the partners, but also our customers directly. So in some cases, Julian and I, for example, are working with state and local governments who are implementing their own capabilities that may at some point involve the partners, but aren't today. But our partners are absolutely essential to this because they have the deep functional expertise, much more so than we do. And so we rely on them to take that expertise and manifest it in an accurate and an unbiased model, like Julian was talking about. I want to add one thing here, Glenn,
Sure.
which is there actually is some history from several years back of AI projects, a little bit before generative AI existed, but using some machine learning models where decisions were made on behalf of the government, as opposed to serving as a co-pilot, like Julian just described, where the system itself was actually making decisions about things like potentially removal of a child in a abusive situation. Turns out that there was a lot of scrutiny in those kinds of projects historically, because if you rely on the AI capability to make the decisions, that has some potential serious concerns. And so what we are doing is very different, and our partners are embracing that philosophy.
And weaving in with that, Julian had mentioned that in your partnership ecosystem, the ethics of responsible AI, that transparency, that accuracy is an expectation that you have of the partners within your ecosystem as well.
That is correct, Glenn. And in every presentation we have, not only to our partners, but also the public forum like the ISM conference that we're talking about, those are standing items or slides that we present, standing concepts that we present to the audience. We really take it very, very seriously in terms of making sure that we do have the responsible AI piece of it, and the transparency and the privacy topics. All those important governance topics are always discussed at a high level at all these public forums, and then we dive deeper into them as we start doing POCs or solution development.
Thank you. And Andy, what do you think your partners are most excited about when they think about the use of generative AI in bringing efficiencies to health and human services community?
My opinion is that they finally have an opportunity to really fundamentally change the way these services are delivered. I mean, obviously, there are going to be some economic efficiencies. I'm sure that that's important to everyone involved. But fundamentally, being able to change the way these services are delivered, being able to identify problems perhaps before they occur, being able to enabling the end recipient of a program in a way that those individuals have not been enabled historically, that is transformative. I mean, we talk about digital transformation. This really can achieve those sorts of things and maybe overall help the well-being of our citizens in this country.
Gentlemen, you have given me a lot of exciting points about what the technology of generative AI means to the future of the health and human services community. I love, Andy, that you pointed out that what we often use that phrase digital transformation, but as you've just pointed out, we're really talking now about a technology that has a transformative opportunity to bring so many new efficiencies to such an important field, and I look forward to chatting with you both in the future about how that continues to evolve. Any final thoughts that either of you would like to add?
I would just like to add that it would be great to get the perspective of our partners in this as well, and I think that's the plan. So I think that you'll get some unique perspective from them in terms of what they've learned through this process, because it's still very early days. And I look forward to seeing the collection of their answers too.
Thank you, Andy.
And I second that with Andy as well. I mean, it's been a great experience thus far for me as well. From a technical perspective, it's been a great partnership. They're the subject matter experts. We are the technical experts. And I think that we have really great things that we're going to see from these partnerships and POCs.
Thank you both so much. I look forward to learning more. Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Glenn.
Bye for now.